Hi friends, Sarah here from Sunset Bow. So I wanted to do a VR to a list of 20 questions about tarot that I think was originated by the channel Geek Girl Does Tarot. I really love her channel. I think I originally saw this on Peekaboo Rose's channel, but I thought it might be fun also as sort of one of my kind of more introductory videos to answer some of these questions and talk a little bit more about just tarot in general and my thoughts and feelings on it, and share some of that information with everybody. So let's start with question number one. And question number one is, what was your first tarot deck? So I remember actually buying a couple of different tarot decks when I first started out, and I don't really remember which was the one that I bought first. So the decks that I bought when I first started out, I knew that I wanted a Rider-Waite-Smith style deck. So I remember buying the Universal Weight, which is the, sort of pretty one that was recolored by Mary Hanson Roberts. I bought the Radiant Rider-Waite, which is that redrawn, recolored one that has really bright colors. I bought the Robin Wood Tarot, and I bought the Hanson Roberts Tarot. All of which are either Rider-Waite-Smith decks or Rider-Waite-Smith clones with very similar imagery. This was back in 2003, so at the time there weren't quite as many sort of recolorings available of the Rider-Waite-Smith, and most specifically the one that wasn't available back then is the Centennial Edition, which nowadays is actually my favorite Rider-Waite-Smith version. The one that I really resonated with was the Radiant Rider-Waite. So I ended up giving away the Universal Weight to a friend who I thought would really like it. I also, as between the other two decks that I got, I had the Hanson Roberts and I had the Robin Wood, and the Robin Wood ended up being the one that I resonated with more, so I gave away the Hanson Roberts to another friend that I thought would really enjoy that style of artwork. The other one that I had bought at that time was the Osho Zen, and that one I just didn't connect to at all. So I think I ended up selling that one on eBay. But the ones that I did keep were the Radiant Rider-Waite and the Robin Wood. I do still have both of them. The Robin Wood is the deck that I actually finally learned to really read tarot with. So I did actually for several years, that was my main deck that I worked with. I don't really work with the Robin Wood as much anymore, but I still love it, so I still hang on to it. I also still have my Radiant Rider-Waite, and that's a deck where, because I have the Centennial now, I don't really feel the need to hang on to the Radiant Rider-Waite, but it's laying around my house because I am planning to give it to the first person in my life who expresses an interest in tarot and doesn't have their own deck yet. So I'm just waiting for one of my friends to say, "Oh, you read tarot, that's so interesting, I wish I could," and then they will be getting that Radiant Rider-Waite. So that's the plan. Hasn't happened yet, just waiting for it to happen. So number two, the question was, what made you stick with that first deck that you got? So again, for me, the one that I got early on that I ended up reading with the most was the Robin Wood. And the thing that made me stick with it, I'd say, at least for those couple of years, like I said, I don't really read with it anymore, but the thing that made me stick with it was really the art style. It is a very beautiful deck, and it's very, the colors are beautiful, and the art style has a very sort of illustration kind of quality. I know Robin Wood is an illustrator, and she has illustrated some like fantasy novels and things like that, and so it was really those elements of it that made me stick with it. It's a very, very pretty deck. Like I said, I don't really read with it anymore, but and my style is a little different now. But it really spoke to me at the beginning, and it was also just one of those situations where it was a deck that just talked to me in a really clear voice, and I don't know why. It just did. Something about it I was able to connect to, and I don't really have that same connection anymore. But I'm still never gonna give it up, because it's special to me. Question number three, how often do you read? So I read a couple times a week probably. I've been trying to read for others more, so I've been trying to do at least a couple of readings a week for strangers. In terms of reading for myself, I do a daily draw, and then I kind of do a full reading for myself maybe once a week, sort of depending on whether or not I feel the need or have a question that I feel like needs answering. Number 4, do you read for yourself? I do read for myself. And, you know, reading for yourself is a little bit of a touchy subject. I mean, I know there are people out there who say that you absolutely should never read for yourself, you know, because you sort of bring in that element of wishful thinking and maybe kind of fool yourself into thinking that the cards mean something that they don't because that's what you want them to mean. For me, that's something I try to be really careful of. Oftentimes, it's a matter of just sort of letting myself kind of fall into a reading and letting the images sort of bring up whatever they bring up in my brain, and allowing myself to kind of surrender to that and give in to that. Whatever the sort of first thing the cards make me think of, I always tend to say, okay, well, that's probably the thing that I have been trying not to think of, but has been in the back of my mind, and the cards are making me think of it now, and that's probably important. Question 5 is, do you read in reverse? And I actually don't read reversals. I discovered very early on when I was trying to read with reversals at the outset of my practice that upside down cards don't talk to me. It's like they're like they don't say anything to me. Like, I get no intuitive hits from upside down images. So I kind of gave up on it early on. I really use spreads. I don't tend to be a very open-ended kind of reader. I use spreads in my readings, and so I find that really spread position and context with other cards will sort of tell me where a card falls on its range of meanings. You know, every card has a sort of spectrum of meanings from shadow to light, you know, and it really, that spread position and the context of the other cards in the reading are what tell you where on that spectrum you should be interpreting the card, and whether or not it's upside down doesn't really make any difference in my opinion. Number 6, what is your favorite / least favorite card? So my favorite card, probably my number 1 favorite card, I'd say is the moon. It really speaks to this whole question of guidance when you're in the dark. I read the moon as a caution to not let yourself sort of give in to what you see in the dark. You know, the things that you see in the dark are often just shadows or you know, monsters that your brain creates out of what you see that aren't really actually there. I was really afraid of the dark as a kid, so that's part of why this has such a strong meaning to me. And so the way that I see the moon is to say, you know, even if there's just a dim light illuminating a path in front of you, as long as you make sure that you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, that, you know, that pathway is going to be clear to you, even if the illumination isn't very bright. You know, you just need to make sure that you don't give in to the fears that you see, the illusions that you see, and make sure that you keep following the path that, you know, you're trying to pursue. And so it's very deeply meaningful to me in that way, and so it's a card that I really, really love. So my least favorite card lately is probably the 7 of Cups. The 7 of Cups has been kind of a pain in my ass recently because it's come up in a couple of different readings, and I'm probably going to actually do a video about this later on because there's more to say about this, but it's come up in a couple of different readings recently where I've wanted to read it in sort of the, you know, very, oh, look at all of the options that are available to you and all the future's infinite possibilities, and aren't you so excited about everything the future holds? That's how I've wanted to read it. But the way that I should have been reading it was, you're completely fooling yourself into thinking that any of the things that you're imagining are realistic, and get your head out of the clouds. So that one has been kind of a pain in my butt recently, I gotta tell you. What is your favorite spread is the 7th question. And I really love just a good 3-card spread, and there's so many variations on the 3-card spread that I find really, really useful. One of them that I really love that I think I actually learned from Katie Flower's channel is the 3-card spread that's within, without advice. That spread is fantastic. I use that one all the time, but there are so many just infinite variations on the 3-card spread, and there's so much you can do with it. So I'd say 3-card spread is probably my favorite. Question 8, how do you care for your deck, or decks in my case? I don't even know. I have like somewhere between 30 and 40 decks, I think. So I don't really do anything special to care for my decks. I don't really, cleanse them with smudging or anything like that. I don't put them under the moonlight. I don't sleep with them under my pillow. Every once in a while, if I'm feeling that the deck is sort of feeling a little bit kind of ruffled up in its energy, I'll put it back in order. That's something that I do pretty regularly with all my decks, just because putting it back in order feels like it's clearing it in some way. But that's pretty much it. I just store them mostly in their own boxes. I prefer storing decks in boxes, but I've been finding recently that I'm kind of running out of space on my tarot bookshelf. And bags take up a lot less space, so I'm gonna teach myself how to make bags. Question number 9, what do you get asked the most? When I'm reading for strangers, the question that I get asked the most is just about love life, in general. That tends to be the question that people ask a lot. When I'm reading for my friends and family, I weirdly get a lot of career questions. And I don't know if that's because everybody sort of right now is in a very kind of stable point in their romantic life or what it is, but especially lately, I feel like pretty much every time I've read for somebody who I am actually close to in my life, whether they be a family member or a friend, they've asked a career question. So I don't know. It's been interesting. Number 10, what would a deck made by you look like? If you've ever watched my deck collection video, you've probably noticed that most of my decks tend to be not particularly modern looking. They tend to be based on usually art styles and eras of days of yore. So my favorite deck of all time is actually the Touchstone Tarot by Cat Black, which is a collage deck of Renaissance and Baroque artwork. It would be something like that. It would have sort of more of an old style of artwork to it, and it'd just be a little bit more classic feeling and a little bit more kind of antique feeling. I love antiques. My house is full of antiques. Number 11, what is the weirdest thing you have ever been asked? I don't think I've ever been asked anything super weird. I have to say, I don't think I've ever been asked something completely off the wall. So I'm sure that will happen to me at some point, the longer I do this. But to date, pretty much everyone who has ever asked me a question has asked me a question that's a pretty normal, everyday question. Number 12, what is your biggest pet peeve in tarot? Talking to people who don't know very much about tarot, who assume that because you read tarot, you're either a medium or a psychic. And I am neither of those things. I do not talk to dead people, and I do not know your future, and I do not know where dead bodies are buried, and I do not know what lottery numbers you should pick, and I don't know any of that stuff. And it drives me crazy when people are kind of flippant about it, and just sort of assume that it's the same thing. All of those 3 things are part of the same thing, because they're just super not, and they're really, really different, and that's a big pet peeve for me. Number 13, do you have any bad tarot habits? I buy too many decks. Does anybody have a different answer to this? I buy too many decks. Question number 14. Do you get hate from skeptics or religious folk? So I've never actually had the experience of getting hate from a religious person. I live in Minnesota, in the sort of greater Twin Cities area, which tends to be a pretty liberal and open-minded place in general. I will say I'm surrounded by a lot of churchgoers. A lot of people that I know go to church, but their church going doesn't narrow their perspective in the same way that it does for some people. I've read tarot for a lot of people who are regular churchgoers, and they find it interesting and fascinating, and nothing to be scared of or judgmental about. So yeah, that's something that I haven't ever experienced. So in terms of skeptics, I've never gotten hate from skeptics, but I have had people be quite surprised that I read tarot, because they see me as the kind of person who they would imagine to be a skeptic about something like tarot. there are a lot of people who are sort of like, oh, I think of you as such a scientific-minded person. How is it that you read tarot? And in my opinion, there is nothing remotely incompatible with having a scientific worldview and also reading tarot, whether you read it as a spiritual practice or as a psychological practice. I don't see anything incompatible there. And, you know, when I explain that to people, it tends to make sense to them, I find. So there's never been any hate. It's more been just people surprised that it's something that I do. Number 15, do you have any readings that you're proud of? Yeah, I've done a lot of readings that I'm proud of. I feel like a lot of times people come to a tarot reading not really knowing what they're looking for, and it's so frequent that the cards give a message that maybe you're not quite anticipating, but it ends up being something that's really helpful for them to hear. So I don't want to get into any specifics, but I've definitely had readings where, you know, I haven't known what was going on in that person's life, but the cards have been giving a real clear message to do a particular thing or act in a particular way, and it ends up being something that they tell me later was really, really helpful to them. So, and that's just the best feeling in the world. Number 16, has reading changed your perspective? It really has, actually. You know, I've been reading tarot I started reading tarot about 15 years ago, back in 2003, and it's changed my perspective on a lot of things. It's changed my perspective on myself in a lot of ways. It's helped me get through some times in my life when I was really struggling with various things, whether they be job issues or mental health issues, or it's really kind of given me more of a window into me, because the great thing about tarot is the way that it can kind of force you to confront things that you don't want to think about. Number 17, do you prepare a space or ritual before reading? Nothing like outward. I have to sort of, you know, prepare my brain in a way internally for reading, just sort of kind of quiet my mind a little bit, and just so I can let those intuitive hits come in. But I don't have any kind of special space that I use usually, or candle that I light, or anything like that. You know, I've read in so many different spaces, coffee shops, friends' dining tables, restaurants, you know, pretty much anywhere. I've pulled cards in my car, I've pulled cards at work, but I do find that, you know, you do have to do something with your brain in order to prepare yourself. It's just a very, like, you know, a quieting of your brain before you read. Number 18, how do you feel about the tarot community? So I love the tarot community. I've been a part of, and you know, a couple of different online communities over the course of my life, and the tarot community has honestly been the kindest and the most welcoming. I mean, I know that no community is perfect, but I do feel that the tarot community as a whole tends to be a very warm place, and it tends to be a very kind place, and I really like it a lot. Number 19, do you have any advice for your younger self? Yeah, I feel like my answer to both number 19 and number 20. Number 20 is, do you have any advice for novices? And I feel like my advice for both of those things would be the same. And that is, you know, there aren't any rules in tarot. There really aren't rules. You know, I spent so much time when I first got started struggling with reading reversals, because all the books talked about reading reversals, and then just finally was like, screw this doesn't work for me. I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm not doing anything when I look at a reverse card except recite some meaning that I've memorized. There's nothing intuitive happening in here when I see that reverse card. So forget it. I'm not going to do it. And it seems like there are so many people who kind of come into the world of tarot, and they're all worried about all of those rules that they hear about. Oh, you shouldn't buy your own deck, and you need to keep them wrapped in silk, and you need to sleep with them under your pillow. You know, whatever works for you as a person is what you should do. And if something doesn't feel right, you shouldn't do that thing. And so I feel like I kind of agonized over a lot of that stuff when I first got started, and it feels like, you know, every day I see some new person agonizing over the same stuff, and it's just, it's so not something that you need to put yourself through. There are no tarot police who are going to come and arrest you for breaking tarot rules. It's just, there's no such thing. And so I feel like as long as people are doing what feels right for them, as long as they are, you know, sort of protecting their own psyche and making sure that they're only doing the things that they actually feel comfortable with. You know, there is a level of pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone that does happen with tarot, but you should never be doing anything that makes you feel really, really unhappy or really, really stressed out or, you know, causes problems in your life. As long as you're just following that basic rule of do what's right for you, there really aren't any other rules. They're cards with pictures on them, and you decide what they mean. That's how it works. So those are my answers to the 20 tarot questions. This was really fun to do, and so thank you so much to Geek Girl Does Tarot. I'm going to link her video below with the origins of these questions, and then I'll also link Peekaboo Rose's video because hers is where I saw this. So, so anyway, thanks so much everybody for watching. Have a great one. Bye-bye.